Hello. Coming to you fresh out of, well, not fresh out of, but I had a bath like an hour and a half ago. And I also cut my hair earlier today. I don't know how obvious that is on camera. And I realized I should probably update about my reading. And by update about my reading, I mean begin the video. I went out and bought Alchemy and a cup of tea like the day after I finished reading to you at the altar, and then didn't start reading it. I instead picked up a different book off Libby and started reading that, and I got like 14% into that book. And then I was like, actually, I don't want to read this. So then I DNF'd that book, and now I'm reading Alchemy and a Cup of Tea. I just needed like a quick little palate cleanser, I guess, to prepare myself to actually read this book. So I'm now like 60 pages in. I don't know. I left the book in the living room, so I can't check the page count. I mean, I could, but I'd have to go all the way to the living room, and I don't want to do that. But I'm a decent little bit in. I am enjoying it so far. Reina and Kyanth continue to be delightful. I am intrigued by where this plot is going. Now, obviously, there are going to be spoilers for earlier installments in the series. It is very hard to talk about the final book in a series without referencing things in previous books. But I'm going to try my best to not talk about spoilers about this book. And if I do talk about spoilers for this book, it will be an extended video that is like for paid patrons on my Patreon. But in any case, the basic premise, like we've kind of gotten the full catalyst of everything that's going on right now. They're kind of struggling in Tawny because Reina becoming queen has caused a huge influx of tourism, and so the town is very overwhelmed, and they're trying to figure out like, how do we deal with this, because we still want our town to be lovely and beautiful and welcoming, but not to hundreds of people every day. And as someone who grew up in a tourist town, yeah, I get that. I've worked at, like, I've worked a summer job at a place that was specifically popular with tourists. So I feel it. I feel it in my soul. I'm very curious about, like, what are they going to do to deal with that? But also, that's more of a, like, side plot thing. The central plot is Reina got kidnapped, and when she was kidnapped, she was like investigating her cell because, of course, she just undid her binds because she's fucking Reina. And she was like investigating her cell and pulled up a loose floorboard and was like, that's an alchemy circle. And, you know, we're not going to touch that. But she was able to like later make a copy of what the circle looks like. And they bring it to Diarn Fio, who is not like a formally trained alchemist. They were like ejected from the magic area or something. I can't remember the specifics of why, but they did some formal study of alchemy and then otherwise like taught themselves the rest of what they know. And so they're looking at it and they're like, this doesn't make any sense, but like I can't figure out what this is for. So now the central plot is kind of like figuring out what was the purpose of this, and also like, why was Reina kidnapped? What was the purpose of kidnapping Reina? As part of that, I don't know if I would consider this a spoiler because it's just kind of like the catalyst of the plot. We've just finished the setup, and they're gonna go to the Magic Harry where there's a tournament for alchemists, and that sounds really fun, and I'm excited. I'm a little sad that Diarn Fio doesn't go with them, and also that Lord Wyland doesn't go with them with Diarn Fio, because I like their romance. But it also makes sense because like their town is overrun. The people in charge of the town should probably stay. But I always love the little sprinkles of Fio and Wyland's relationship that we get. So I'm excited. I would read like a side novella about them. That'd be fun. Or like maybe not a novella, but like a short story about them. I think that'd be fun. Anyway, that is my update. Also, I can't remember. Did I show that I put together? But I built that. It came in a thing, but I talked about it in another video. That's right. I was talking about it in my other video. It hadn't been delivered yet, but it's been delivered. I built it. I'm proud of it. Go me. It is not big enough quite for all of my books. So maybe I'll get another bookcase. I don't know. I do technically own a bookcase. It just is not here, and I don't know if or when it will arrive. But anyway, that's where I'm at with Alchemy and a Cup of Tea. I'm excited to continue reading. Enough rambling from me. I will update when I have updates. All right, I am almost 200 pages into Alchemy and a Cup of Tea. What page am I on? 195. Wow, that was a terrible camera angle. I'm on page 195. I read a whole bunch today and last night before, well, not before bed, but in the evening, because I decided I'm going to try to finish this book this weekend. We'll see if that happens. But I was out doing some stuff today. I decided to go to the library so that I could read in not my apartment for a little bit because I spend too much time just in my apartment. And then while I was out, I went to a little cafe nearby and I got myself a cookie and it was great. So I read on the bus and I read at the library and then I read while waiting for the bus and then I read on the bus and then I finished reading a chapter just now on the couch. And it was all very wonderful. The plot has thickened for sure, as it should, almost 200 pages into a book. I'm trying to think of what I can talk about. The mystery of the alchemical circle is developing, advancing. There's things going on with all the different types of magic that is intriguing, and I'm trying to puzzle out who could be behind it and why. But also, the issues with tourists has ramped up, and I'm not going to get into spoilers here. That will be, as I said before, for the extended video. The problem of tourists is like really, really hurting Tawny and the locals of Tawny right now, and it's very like obvious. I want them to find a solution that lets them keep their tea shop and bookstore, and I think they will, just given that like it's a cozy fantasy. They're not going to have a conclusion. That's sad. But I don't know what they're going to do. I don't know how they're going to get around that. And I'm very intrigued to find out what that solution will be. We have met... How do I say this without it being a spoiler? There was a plot thread from earlier that I had noticed wasn't addressed at all in the previous book. And I thought maybe... like, oh, maybe it's just not being picked up again. Maybe that was actually the conclusion of that plot point. But it's picked up again in this book. And it is part of the broader mystery, and I'm very intrigued about what's going on with it. But it's also just really nice to see this properly resolved. And I didn't quite tear up, but it was close. I will say the writing is a bit rougher. There's the issues with word proximity that was a problem in the previous book, but also just some of the descriptions and phrasings feel a bit off at times. Like there was something like, oh, I'm trying to figure out I don't remember the exact phrase, but it was something like, dread fell over them like an ominous blanket or something. And I'm like, you don't need to call it an ominous blanket. You can just call it a blanket. Like, that's a weird way to phrase that. And just sometimes like there'll be a word specifying something that doesn't need to be specified, or like it's hard to explain without giving specific examples, and I can't think of specific examples right now. But the writing isn't as strong in this one. But I find that does happen sometimes with series. As a series picks up in popularity, the editing takes a dip. Because, and this isn't necessarily a thing on the author, because this is now traditionally published, it's not self-published anymore. So this should be on the editors with the publishing house to be checking in on and stuff like that. But I do find that will happen sometimes with series when it gets really popular, is the editing will take a dip, because my understanding is that why spend money on more editing when you can get just as much money selling it as is, and then you have a higher profit margin. That's kind of what happens with series sometimes, or even just particular authors if they sell really well. And I think that's happening a bit with this one. It's not like unreadable or anything, but I am noticing it more. But yeah, there's a lot going on, and I'm very curious to see how it all gets like resolved. And I guess I'll update when I have more to say. Apologies for how absolutely wrecked I look if it shows up on camera. My child took 3.5 hours to put to bed tonight, so I am tired. But I did finish reading Alchemy and a Cup of Tea. I have mixed feelings on this book. It's a 4-star. I did mostly enjoy it, but there were enough, mostly just editing issues, that it actually impacted my ability to enjoy the book. Notably stuff like I remember there's a description of like an alchemy circle being used, and it said like a glowing circle glowed through the door, and I'm like, that's a first draft sentence. No one could have read that sentence over and not noticed that it said a glowing circle glowed through the door. What are we doing? There are also a lot of like continuity errors or like logical inconsistencies. So like, I don't want to get it too into spoilers, but basically there's a point where someone was trapped, like Keonth had summoned Earth to wrap around them and trap them. But then a few pages later, their hands are free. And I'm like, okay, how are their hands free? They were trapped in the Earth. Presumably, if they're trapped in the Earth, Keonth would have trapped their hands to prevent them from doing the exact thing that they did. There was also a bit where, it's hard to talk about without getting into spoilers. There's a bit where Keonth was trying to, or not Keonth, Raina was trying to figure out something about the alchemical circles. And so she was asking about it. And in this conversation, a language is brought up, and Raina is surprised that this language exists. But then later, when she's telling Keonth what she learned, she says the reason she went and asked those questions was because she recognized the language. But in the conversation about the language, she had not known about that language. And like, these are all things that could have been very easily fixed with just a little bit of editing. Like, they're not huge problems, it's just editing oversights. But it creates problems, especially because a lot of this was happening around the climax. There was also, again, just the same like writing prose issues that I was talking about earlier. I also, like, the climax was a bit, like the actual, I'll get into that in the spoiler version of this, but I kept finding myself being like, well, the last time this happened, you did this, so why don't you do that again? I'm also, it seems to have, well, it definitely has a pull at the end for like a spin-off series, but I'm not interested. Just like where the story would be picking up, that's not something I'm interested in following. I did enjoy like stuff with how there's things that are resolved for alchemy and alchemical magic, and I thought that was a neat idea. I liked some of the stuff we learned about dragons. There were good things in here, and I did, like, it's still a 4-star read, but just the editing really took a dive on this one, and it's at a level that it did impact the reading experience, and that's very disappointing. I think that's enough rambling. I'm very tired. I need to go put the dishes away, and then I need to try to get some sleep. So, sorry for the low energy of this ending, but maybe you feel how I felt about the ending of this book. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. If you made it this far, leave some kind of circle emoji in the comments, because this book had a bunch of alchemy circles. And I will see you in the next video. Okay, bye!